Friends, tonight's program with Jill Stein. We're going to have a conversation with Jill Stein about Julian Assange and US empire and the US political system. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things. Towards the end of the program, we'll be doing audience Q&A as well. So if you have any questions for Jill tonight, have them ready and you'll get your chance to ask them tonight. We're really honored to be joined by Jill Stein. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Jill is Dr. Jill Stein. She ran for president as the nominee for the Green Party in 2012 and 2016. She is a very important leader and activist and organizer for causes of social justice and peace. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Jill, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
The honor is mine. Great. Really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much, Elmer.
Yeah, same here. So, when we first met, and let me also say, actually, before we begin, that this event is sponsored by Massachusetts Peace Action. We are a local peace anti-war group here in Massachusetts, campaigning for a more peaceful U.S. foreign policy. This event is also sponsored by the Community Church of Boston, a really great church in Boston, committed to social justice and peace and activism. So I'll share links for them in the chat later in the later during the program today. So yeah, Jill, when we first met, it actually happened to be at the Community Church of Boston. We were honoring Julian Assange with an award, the Sacco and Vanzetti Award. And his father and his brother were there to receive the award on his behalf. And you were there as well, saying some really nice things and important things. So to get us started with tonight's discussion, can you tell us why are you so passionate about the case of Julian Assange, and also why is it so important for all of us?
Yeah, I think the persecution of Julian Assange is kind of a microcosm of the crisis of our democracy. It's not only an assault on press freedom, it also makes a mockery of our judicial system. It's an abuse of human rights. And, to look at it closely, this is sort of what happens under empire. And in many ways, we have a choice here between empire or democracy. They're not compatible with each other. And the question is, which side are we on? We can talk later about the ways in which the US empire has really gone off the rails. But one of the ways that happens is that the empire comes home and becomes the enemy within. And that's very much where we are right now. And to actually look at this case, you see really just shocking evidence of the way that Julian Assange is the victim of psychological torture at the hands of the state. That is a very dangerous thing. That's not a, that's not a state of affairs that we should be at all casual about. And, to look at the imposition of arbitrary confinement, arbitrary and solitary confinement, which is considered torture by the United Nations, the total cutting off of his communications. He was not allowed even what prisoners are allowed to have, the basic of 1 hour of sunshine and exercise per day. He was subject to character assassination campaigns and could not respond to them because his communications were cut off. The security agencies, namely the FBI and the CIA, basically colluded with other state governments and organizations in order to illegally spy on him. Remember, Daniel Ellsberg won his case because the office of his psychiatrist had been broken into. And in this case, it really greatly exceeds that kind of violation of due process, in that he was spied upon by cameras that were installed through the wishes of the CIA, was spying on him in the Ecuadorian embassy, and not only spying on him, but also on his lawyers. In any real system of justice, that would have put an end to the prosecution right then and there, but the excesses actually go way beyond that. I won't detail them all, but I do want to say that his communications with his attorneys were basically completely blocked, and all sorts of intrigue was created by the CIA and the FBI that actually went to the nation of Iceland, and the interior minister has been shouting about this for the past 10 years, that basically the FBI came to Iceland under false pretenses in order to orchestrate crimes against the state of Iceland, which in fact they had already done when they showed up. But basically they were caught red-handed in an illegal scheme of entrapment. Not only that the entrapment was illegal, but they created crimes, basically computer crimes, in order to try to vilify Julian Assange, because people tend to be very sympathetic to whistleblowers, especially when they're blowing the whistle on war crimes and corruption and torture, which is what Julian Assange is being persecuted for. What he's doing essentially is being a publisher, and this case establishes entirely new precedent of going after a publisher for doing their job, which in this case is to publish true information, which is absolutely vital to the public interest and to holding government to account. If we don't have a press that's willing to be a watchdog instead of a lapdog, which is what we have right now, then we don't have a democracy. The First Amendment was established as the First Amendment for very good reason. At the time, we were throwing off the chains of a colonial empire. So the First Amendment, as well as protection of privacy, the right to protest and so on, all these things that are being massively violated right now, they were established because that's what you need to have a democracy. And to allow them to be attacked by basically the excesses of the intelligence agencies right now is to essentially roll over for empire instead of standing up to be the democracy that we must be. That in a nutshell, is why, I think when people become aware of what's going on here and break through the media propaganda, which is a poster child in and of itself of the corruption and the co-optation of corporate media, when people break through to actually hear and understand what's going on, it's extremely motivating. International leaders, the president of Mexico just came out a couple days ago demanding that Biden drop the case. Parliamentarians from across Western democracies have stood up, notably not so in the US, where people are very intimidated by our climate of McCarthyism. And having been a target of that myself, I think it's just so important for people to really think very carefully about the kind of propaganda that is directed against us. We used to be protected from propaganda, or at least more protected than we are now. And part of that came after the Nixon excesses. And after Nixon was impeached, the Church Committee established better protections so that we wouldn't go down that road of influence peddling, corporate influence, malfeasance by the security agencies. They were established at that time, but they have basically been rolled back. And so we are now subject to propaganda here at the domestic level, much as we've continued to do internationally, a lot of the people who've been the experts in military propaganda are now in charge of the talking points put out by US security agencies right now, right into the hands of the corporate media that obediently repeats after Big Brother here. So, you know, we're in a very dangerous situation. It's very important for us to stand up and defend our democracy, which is very much under attack.
Yeah, definitely. That was you said so many great things. Wow, there's so much to pick up on here. I really liked what you said about how the case of Julian Assange is one example of like the U.S. empire run amok and come home, like the effects of a U.S. empire coming home. And I'd like to explore that further later in the program. Speaking of the excesses in the persecution of Julian Assange, one thing that I thought was really overboard and interesting was didn't they go through his child's diaper to test the DNA to harass the family from that angle. So yeah, you know, when we were at a community church of Boston and we met Julian's father and brother John and Gabriel Shipton, I felt so sad because their family member is in prison and can't be with them and can't hug them and stuff. And but even though that's really sad and important to remember, this goes far beyond one person and one family. This has grave implications for us all. As you mentioned, this has grave implications for the press. If Julian Assange is found guilty, my understanding is won't that change the rules for the press essentially? So, but anyways, Jill, so one thing I want to talk about here further is how Assange, through his platform and WikiLeaks, has provided us all the platform to expose government secrets, expose war crimes, really important information for the public to know for moral reasons and other reasons as well. And he's being persecuted for that. So people for the First Amendment and against war and for peace, we should be supportive of Julian Assange to be free and not persecuted by the US government and other governments. But a lot of liberals and progressives, I've been seeing comments, all types of comments like, oh, Julian Assange got what he deserved because he helped Trump. And so can you talk about that? How like the Trump era, Julian Assange is bad now because of Trump, and you're bad, and Glenn Greenwald is bad, and the neocons are good, and George Bush is good now. And so can we talk a little bit how like the Trump era kind of redrew the lines a little bit?
Yeah, well, and I think it's really important for people to remember the track record of the security agencies that are and the corporate media that are feeding this stuff, you know, to us. How did we get into Iraq in the first place? You know, this was about the weapons of mass destruction handed down to us. You know, that message handed down to us from the security agencies and you know, from the corporate media. How did we get into the first Iraq war? It was about the incubator babies, which also turned out to be a hoax. How did we get into the Vietnam War? You know, that was about the Gulf of Tonkin disaster, which also turned out to be a hoax. You know, you can take it from Mike Pompeo himself. What did he say? This was in 2019, so it's not like this was like forever long ago. This was like pretty recent. Mike Pompeo, in a public appearance at Texas A&M University, said that, and I'm very closely quoting him right now. What he said, sorry, what he said was that the at the CIA, their motto is, you know, we don't lie, cheat, or steal. And Mike Pompeo kind of giggled and said, actually, we do. We lie, we cheat, we steal, and we have whole courses in how to do that. So, you know, take him at his word on this, at least. That is what they do. So you have to be very careful about the larger propaganda campaigns that are being directed at us so that we will support what? What's going on right now is that we have a whole new Cold War. We are back in the McCarthyite era. We not only have a Cold War, but we are, back into censorship and propaganda, and we are demonizing political opposition. That's what I had a taste of in Russiagate, which all turned out to be, a pile of BS. And the principal documents that established Russiagate and also accused me of being a Russian asset, one by one, they have been proven false. Aaron Mate actually does a really great job of addressing this with Matt Taibbi and Katie Helper in May of last year on Useful Idiots, the program that takes on that concept. And, it just makes the overarching case, hang on a second. It makes the overarching case that you don't want to be an obedient servant of the war machine and its propaganda apparatus. So you really need to look at, it's like they would now be talking us into attacking Venezuela. Look at how Biden has not only gone back on the Obama era progress towards a rapprochement with Cuba, he's actually preserved the murderous sanctions and even gone beyond and imposed now, imposed actually hundreds more of these sanctions and created a conversation. If you were listening to mainstream media, you would think that the protests in Cuba came out of nowhere with absolutely no background to them, and that the problem is the Cuban government hasn't established a great economy. Well, the Cuban government has, their economy, not to say that they are a perfect government, but you get very flawed governments, in particular when they're under attack. Castro for himself did not even align with Russia until this was like way back in the 50s, I believe, until the US had imposed its murderous sanctions on them. Haiti is another example, and Haiti's been dealing with this for centuries, where Haiti has essentially been shut down. Sorry, hold on one second. Let me just let the doggy outside of the room. Hold on one second. Yola, come on over here.
Take your time, Jill. I actually have to close my window as well because it's raining pretty hard here and there's a lot of background noise, so I'm going to close my window.
I'm sorry, our neighbor just got locked out of his house in the pouring rain, so that's what all that commotion was about. All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, just continue, pick up where you left off.
Yeah, so I was just making the point that you really need to examine each of these claims. Hold on just one second. All right, I think we've dealt with the key problem. And Russiagate itself, it's really important to look at the whole context of Russiagate and the propaganda that attached to that. So Russiagate, was an effort to justify Hillary Clinton's loss to a clown of a game show host. And so suddenly all these reasons were created. And I want to just hit on, this accusation that I or the Greens were spoilers in that election. That too is part of this character assassination campaign, which is part of the whole McCarthyism climate that's attempting to shut down political opposition. In 2016, wow, okay. I don't know if you saw that, but that was a lightning strike. It sounded like it was like right outside the door.
Yeah, we saw that. We heard it.
Did you see the lightning?
Or we heard it for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, no trees have fallen, so we're okay. Yeah, I think that was just like the universe adding emphasis here to the storyline, you know, which is that if you took Greens out of the race in 2016, Hillary Clinton still would have lost. And the effort to smear us as spoilers who stole Hillary's votes, you know, that's totally fake. It assumes that you could take Green votes and just move them over into the Democratic column. Well, actually, polls show that is not true, especially in 2016, where there were detailed polls that showed that had I not been in the race, the people who voted Green almost overwhelmingly would not have shown up. And you can actually do the calculations based on the numbers, and it would not have changed the outcome in any of the states that were close, the swing states or any other states for that matter. So this, you know, really needs to be seen as a part of a character assassination campaign, much like what was run against Ralph Nader or Cynthia McKinney or Dennis Kucinich for that matter. It's not limited to third parties. It's essentially progressives, and especially progressives who want to challenge the war machine. Bernie Sanders himself got a big dose of Russia gating, and you know, also called and smeared a Russian asset, and Tulsi Gabbard. So this comes with the territory. And if you just accept it for what it is, then we will never have a peace candidate, ever. And in the words of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. You know, back in his time, in the mid 19th century, he was making that case based on long experience. Well, that long experience has continued. Power does not just roll over. And right now we have power that is really more intense, and I dare say more corrupt, probably than at any other time in US history. Just given the size of US wealth and power right now, the fact, you know, we have disparities right now, economic disparities that are absolutely unprecedented, where 3 billionaires now have the wealth of half of the American population. You know, and while the billionaires have increased their wealth by over $1 trillion, almost $1.5 trillion since the disaster of the pandemic, while something like 8 more million people have fallen into poverty, which was up there to start with, you know, disparities are completely off the charts and are absolutely crushing, bigger than they have ever been throughout history, is what the historians will tell you. So those disparities in economic power are paralleled by disparities in political power. So it's really important that we challenge the economic disparities, but to really do that, we also have to challenge the political disparities. And we can go into how we can do that without risking a so-called spoiled election, because there are very simple and popular election reforms that are conspicuously absent from the Democrats' voting reform agenda. There are great things about HR 1, but HR 1 unfortunately will move us in the wrong direction. Everyone, especially marginalized people, have a right to vote, but they have a right to vote in a system that's not rigged from the get-go by the economic power of the elites to select those candidates and to shut out those who would challenge this very unfair, unsustainable, disastrous economic system that we have.
Yeah, that's totally right. There's a lot you said there that I want to pick up on, and I'm really glad you brought up this whole concept of it's not your fault that Trump won and became the president. You cannot just convert Jill Stein voters into Hillary Clinton voters. It doesn't work like that. And the opinion polls show that those people who voted for you, they wouldn't have voted for Hillary, not in enough numbers to swing the election. I want to talk more about that whole dynamic actually, but first, before we get to that, I want to talk about Russiagate because you brought it up. And we actually had on Aaron Mate here for a program to debunk Russiagate. He's done so much great work on this, and he's very meticulous. And the Russiagate, this whole concept that Vladimir Putin and Russia, they hacked the US election to make Trump the president, and Trump is like a puppet of Vladimir Putin. Kind of an absurd theory. And in the book Shattered, the authors write about how during when Hillary Clinton lost that same election night, they cooked up the plan like, okay, we're going to blame Russia to not take any accountability for their bad positions and their lack of popularity, and because they lost the election. But for those of us here right now who weren't present with that program for Aaron Mate where he debunked Russiagate, could you expand on Russiagate a little bit more, and what is it and why it's so harmful? We need to be working with Russia, not antagonizing them, and how the Russiagate narrative, it was propagated by, again, people on the left, Democrats, and this neo-McCarthyism coming from the Democrats again. And yeah, and also how you got caught up in this. They say you're a Russian agent, or they say you're a useful idiot for Russia, which is like really, I think, insulting to either your motivations or you as a person. So yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I think I'm not a mind reader. I can't say exactly what the purpose of Russiagate was. It has been, profoundly discredited, even to where the media now stops parroting these preposterous assertions that continue to emerge, most recently from Luke Harding, who at The Guardian, who had given fuel to a lot of this to start with. And I don't want to go into their jealousies of Julian Assange, how he has been really the most consequential publisher probably in the last generation, or the interest of the Democrats in finding scapegoats. But it really did devolve into a new McCarthyism, or perhaps it began with a new McCarthyism, which tends to come with a militarization. And in the same way that economic disparities have gone off the charts, you tend to see with corporatism, militarism, and fascism as well, with kind of unmitigated corporatism. It's a very dangerous thing. So it's not surprising to see with this, incredible, extreme economic disparities that we've developed over the last decade. We've been extremely militarized. Our police have been militarized. We see military budgets that are now 55% and even more. We just had the biggest, the Congress just one of the budget committees just put forward the biggest budget ever, which it already was, but now it's even bigger. It's like they outcompete each other for their corporate donors from the defense contractors, the war profiteers. So the whole system has really gone very much off the charts. And it's important to see Russiagate in that context. And so one part of this is its consequence for international law, for diplomacy, for treaties. It's extremely destructive and extremely dangerous in an age when the US and Russia in particular have thousands, I think it's something like 5,000 apiece, nuclear weapons, enough to destroy the earth many, many times over. So the powers that be are really playing with fire here by engaging this new Cold War, and I really got my start in activism way back in the 70s, I'd say, When I was involved with Physicians for Social Responsibility at the time, that was very involved in doing citizen to citizen diplomacy to try to overcome the intransigence of our governments so that we could do something for the people of the planet and get past this. And citizen diplomacy was incredibly important in moving forward the nuclear weapons treaties. Everyday people have been really important in moving forward the latest proposed treaty, which is the nuclear weapons ban, which is really where we should go. And regrettably, our government has played a very nefarious role in trying to block that and prevent that from moving forward. Other nuclear powered, nuclear armed countries have not stepped up either, but we've been right there with them. Russiagate, at any rate, let me just go back to the substance of it a little bit, because it claimed, number one, that Trump and Putin were colluding before the election in order to give him the race. It claimed that Russian social media was very powerful and impactful with these ridiculous memes, these masturbation juvenile memes, these Jesus will save you type memes. It was a horrible kind of clickbait campaign. And in reality, there is not evidence to show that this was anything other than clickbait for an advertising firm whose alleged connection to Putin has kind of fallen through the supposed proof for it. There actually was no proof for it. And in fact, the whole argument that the DNC emails had been stolen by Russia or by anybody has also been disproven. It turned out that the firm that was hired by the DNC, this firm called CrowdStrike, their testimony had been secret. Well, that testimony was finally made publicly available a year ago. And what did it say? It said that CrowdStrike actually did not have evidence that anybody had stolen their emails, which suggested maybe it was an inside, leak or something to that effect, because those emails did get out, but there was no evidence that anybody had intruded to get them. And where is the media in covering this? Well, the media, unfortunately, is the lapdog instead of the watchdog that it needs to be. And without a media, it's no wonder people are so purposefully misinformed and disinformed, so that we will be disempowered from actually doing what we need to do. I should mention one other thing, which I found, actually both of these really impacted me directly. I first heard about this from a neighbor of mine who called me very worried because she had just heard through town meeting that I was in some kind of relationship with Russia to help Trump. So what did this turn out to be? This was the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier, which was also produced by the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, with their funding and their sponsorship, they got a document that really served their needs. And it basically, claimed that there were these P tapes, catching Trump in these very compromised positions. And it made the claim that that's why Trump was being bribed by Russia. I mean, there were all kinds of wild theories, but included in there was the assertion that I had been paid by Russia to attend what was basically a peace conference and an opportunity to address global media with what was my agenda, my and the Green Party agenda in that race. It was for a global Green New Deal. It was for nuclear disarmament, and it was to stop Russia's bombing and intervention in Syria. We were calling for basically a peace offensive in the Middle East. That was my agenda, and I was very anxious to get that out wherever possible. And that, I was able to give a speech which was public. The whole thing was public, and we had disclosed everything as it occurred, including that we raised money to pay for the whole trip so that we would be taking nothing from any government, including the Russian government, in order to do that. And then here comes the Steele dossier saying that I was being paid by Russia to do this, which was, you know, contrary to evidence that was already in the public record. You know, and once I saw that they were making these outrageous claims about me, I knew that this was just a pile of junk. And so it turns out, long after the fact, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice has basically affirmed that this document is a pile of junk. It's essentially internet rumor and nothing more substantive than that. So that, which was really the foundation of the whole thing, has completely dissolved to smithereens. And there's one other piece I want to mention. This had to do with the social media campaign that supposedly made me a Russian asset because I was part of these memes, you know, saying that I was a peace candidate. And don't you want to vote for a peace candidate? Oh, that was a really powerful Facebook advertisement that clearly persuaded, you know, 1 million people to vote for me. You know, it is like complete garbage. You know, you don't get stuff for cheap when you're trying to persuade people to vote for you. And bad memes, and a handful of them, you know, you have to spend a lot of money, especially when you're in a campaign that was, you know, that in which $6 billion was being spent. $100,000 social media campaign doesn't amount to squat. And the, you know, the frosting on the cake here is that the organization that provided the report that established this claim that social media was being used by Russia to bias the election, you know, not, countries do this, but to say that this was meaningful or, you know, or effective, you know, was a joke. Well, it turned out that group called New Knowledge, you haven't heard about them since. The reason is, shortly after they came out with their report, they were exposed, and these were a bunch of military analysts who were basically peddling their skills now in the corporate arena as consultants. And well, it turns out they were hired by Democrats in a special election for Senate in 2017, where they had created a false flag Russian interference campaign from them. They were pretending to be Russians interfering in an election on behalf of the Republican so as to discredit the Republican in order to help the Democrat. So once that surfaced, and that was in the New York Times, actually, once that surfaced, it became a little bit embarrassing to propagate this theory that was essentially created by those who actually are interfering in our elections. They just happen to be Americans and proponents of the Democratic Party. So, you know, when you hear about Russiagate, you really need to step back in the same way that when you hear about reasons that we should go to war right now, whether it's with Cuba or with Venezuela, or whether we should go occupy Haiti, whether we should, you know, confront China over Taiwan, I'd say it's really important to listen to the other side. You know, don't prejudge these, you know, these life and death decisions. They're not just life and death decisions. Now these are civilization ending decisions. Don't let them take you for granted and try to dupe you and drag you along by those who have sold out. I want to recommend to people the article that Chris Hedges just published in Sheer Post. I don't have the title offhand, but if you just look at his latest publication, it's basically about the history of empires. And there have been about 70 of them, 70 empires in the last 4,000 years. And we are, of course, the current one, the reigning empire for the last, you know, certainly the last, since the Second World War, we have been the reigning empire. And what Hedges points out is that history tells us that empires, almost invariably, they go down in a blaze of war. And they become overextended, they become corrupted. I presume as they accumulate wealth, although he doesn't go into this, but this is just in my own mind, as empires accumulate wealth, which they do by stealing it from around the world, because they tend to have more powerful armaments than other countries. So they can go and steal resources, essentially, which is what empires do. As they accumulate wealth, they become more corrupt as well. And as they become more corrupt, they become more embroiled in these global colonialist adventures. And, they eventually reach a tipping point where they self-destruct. And in fact, that is the title. It's something to the effect, the suicidal actions of empire, something to that effect. Maybe someone will put it in the chat, can just check that. But it's really important. Don't let them inflict amnesia on you. Remember where we are in history, and remember the danger of this moment, and remember how we got here, basically through lies, abuse, and corruption on the part of economic and political elites. That's how we got here. And taking their propaganda to heart is not going to get us out of this. We really have to start thinking like a democracy and acting like a democracy, and actually demanding evidence, and insisting that we're hearing from people on the ground, not just the talking points of the security agencies, of the CIA and the FBI, who are feeding us this garbage intended to prop them up. Like, look at the recent revelations about Governor Whitmer, for example, that are implicating the FBI in entrapment here, just like the FBI, did and still does to Muslims, in order to boost their budgets and drive home that they are so important for protecting our safety. It's really important to take this stuff, I shouldn't say with a grain of salt. I think you have to assume that this is not true until proven otherwise. Let it be proven true before you start believing it or acting on it. And we have to raise the bar. We have to raise the bar much higher, and we cannot afford to simply fight one issue at a time or settle for window dressing. It's very clear, whether you're looking at war, endless war, nuclear weapons, the climate collapse, the economy that continues to serve the very rich and devastate increasingly everyone else. We can't be small about the ask here. We're really deciding whether we have a future or not. And it's really important. In my view, this is why I'm a member, of the Green Party. This is why, to my mind, independent politics. I'm not here to advocate for one party or another. I'm here to advocate for democracy and to advocate for political independence from war, from Wall Street, and the military-industrial complex and the co-opted media. I'm here really to advocate for restoring our democracy, and we need to fight for it like our lives depend on it, because they do.
Yeah, totally. That's absolutely right. Yeah, once again, there's so much to unpack there, and lots of you spoke about lots of great things. In regards to this FBI entrapment of, for example, Muslim people after 9/11, to say that they caught terrorists and to justify increased budgets for their FBI agency. They entrapped innocent people, including sometimes people with mental health issues, or people who were suffering from poverty and unemployment and loneliness, like vulnerable people. We've done, we're starting to do some work on that issue here at Massachusetts Peace Action. I've done a couple of programs on them. We're working with impacted family members. But it's also important, as you raised, that it seems like there's something like that going on with this case with the governor of Michigan kidnapping case, Governor Whitmer, and for us to say that it is wrong for FBI to entrap people with these entrapment schemes, regardless of what their ideology is, even if they are Trump supporters, that does not make us Trump supporters or Trump defenders. That makes us against FBI overreach and entrapment. And like it's a principled position, not a political Democrat or Republican or who's president. In regards to Russiagate, okay, there's so much to unpack there. This whole notion that the memes and social media ads that Russia bought, that it swung an election, it's absurd. Our own corporations and PACs, they dwarf the amount of money that Russia spent on social media. So it's just ridiculous. This Trump Russia collusion charge, it was totally unproven in the Mueller report. And we have great journalists like Aaron Mate again, who have gone through it and exposed all of this stuff. Brian, if you could please find that video about Aaron Mate spending like 2 hours debunking all the Russiagate threads. Could you please share that in the chat in case people are interested? This Russiagate story is so important, I think, because for a lot of reasons. Number one, I saw after 9/11 how anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hysteria was weaponized by political leaders in the media to push wars abroad and to push a Patriot Act at home. And I fear like I feel like we're using this anti-Russian xenophobia for political reasons, which is so wrong in itself. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, the issue of nuclear weapons, which is one of the most important issues at mass peace action and for the world. We need to work with Russia to get rid of all the nuclear weapons, or to at least ratchet down our nuclear weapons. But we're just like antagonizing Russia here. Dan Ellsberg came and spoke with, he wrote in his book about all the times the world almost blew up because of miscommunications regarding nuclear weapons. And he came here and he told us, he said he is worried that the military industrial complex is hyping up the threat of not just Russia, but also China, so they could sell more nukes and sell more weapons and increase the Pentagon budget. So we have to resist this Russiagate narrative and all these narratives that antagonize and demonize and finger wag at countries like Russia and China and Syria and Venezuela, while we also at the same time give a pass to countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia and our own government, the United States, which are horrible human rights violators. By the way, on this just one last point on this Russiagate thing, Michael made an excellent point in the chat that for us to say that Russia is hacking elections, how hypocritical is that when we have like a whole CIA and we do so much election interference and coups and wars. We did a war in Iraq and we have no moral high ground to say that the other countries are, we just don't have any moral high ground. It's total hypocrisy. Yeah, so Jill, okay, let's talk about, okay.
Can I reflect one thing on what you said, because, remember what Martin Luther King said, that the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence that the world has ever known, that we're not less violent than we were in the Vietnam era, our violence, unfortunately, we are now basically, the military strategy of the U.S. empire was articulated in various documents around 1998 and 2000. And these were called something like Vision 2020. And Vision 2020 meant that the world was our battlefield and we were going to be prepared to fight and win all over the world. And this has really set the modern military agenda, which is absolutely jaw-dropping. We not only have 800 bases around the world, which is about 95% of all bases that exist, we also have special operations in something like 140 countries, and there are only like 190 of them, so most countries around the world have our special operations. It's like we have a turnkey war that's ready to have the key turned almost anywhere, anytime. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Amar. And I would add to that, look at our track record, for God's sakes. You know, we have committed something like 68 regime change outrages since the Second World War. You know, no one comes close to that, you know, so it's like just interfering in an election. That's like the easy stuff, which we actually did to Russia, you know, in 1994 to basically get, I forget his name, but he was like the predecessor to Putin, who then wound up appointing Putin, you know, so we sort of established the, you know, the line of the Russian throne that leads directly to Putin, in the same way that our interventions back in the days of Carter in Afghanistan basically destroyed incipient democracy in Afghanistan, powered up the Taliban in order to make trouble for the Soviet Union. And once you destroy democracy, it's very hard to put it back. And we have done that now. You know, you can just name the countries one after another, you know, aside from Haiti and Honduras and Guatemala and Iran. You know, you can just go through the countries one by one. The Philippines, you know, it's like there are very few countries left that we haven't messed up. And remember, once we mess them up, El Salvador, I didn't mention, you know, once we mess them up, it's not a simple proposition to put them back together. So I just want to strongly agree with what you're saying about militarism being a huge problem. And I don't think you can be a progressive except for militarism. You know, you can't be a progressive except for Palestine. You can't be a progressive except for militarism. And, you know, and we need to talk about that. And I would just point out that most Americans agree with us. If you look at recent polls, twice as many people want to cut the military as expand the military, twice as many. That's significant. But you wouldn't know that to hear from our political parties, which are basically bought and paid for by Wall Street and the war machines. And you wouldn't know it to hear from media, which to me is why we need big solutions here, why the window dressing isn't going to solve this. We really need transformational change, which the Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, they won't tolerate. Look at what they've done to Bernie Sanders over and over, or Dennis Kucinich, or Jesse Jackson before him. You know, you can keep going back and back and back, and this is what they do. And each time they will pretend that, oh, but it's going to be really different going forward, and there's still hope there, and we're going to keep fighting, you know. And they have their apologists who are generally well-meaning and well-intended, but they can't break away because they have a career and it would be devastating to do so, you know, and they figure, well, it's better that I do my little bit than nothing at all. You know, I just, you can see that we are going over the waterfall here, kind of one bucket at a time. And, you know, to continue on this path is really a guarantee that we're going to get where we're going. So in my mind, it's really important for us to debate this. Let's debate this. Let's get this out of the woodwork and out of the closet and hold this debate. And that's what they basically try to do, is to silence dissidents, to silence principled third parties and candidates, in the same way that they tried to silence Tulsi Gabbard and Dennis Kucinich and Bernie Sanders, basically, too, because they don't like a challenge. But we've got to insist on that challenge. You know, to my mind, I'm tired of seeing that challenge squelched, just totally shut down from within the Democratic Party. And you can have an inside-outside strategy too. If the insiders, the progressives in the Democratic Party were smart, they would be fighting for ranked choice voting, because there's nothing that would make them more powerful than to have a truly progressive alternative that would put the power in their hands to actually move a progressive agenda forward. And for a number of reasons, the the referendum in Massachusetts for ranked choice voting failed. It had a lot to do with COVID, I think, but ranked choice voting is growing all over the place. It's really important for us to keep pushing that forward, and not only ranked choice voting, but also proportional representation, which I won't go into in great depth, but it's even more effective actually than ranked choice voting as a way to give people more choices and to actually get those choices into power. This is why the Greens right now, are looking at the potential, premier position, prime minister position in Germany. The Greens have really grown because they had proportional representation. Proportional representation basically allows you to be represented by the proportion that you really are. And if you're included in debates and so on, the agenda that we represented has now been embraced. It's kind of been adopted by progressives, from the Green New Deal to student debt bailout, which, I was ridiculed for by John Oliver, who thought that was very funny, ha ha ha. Student debt and free public higher education, reparations, and so on. That has really been adopted lock, stock, and barrel, although not with the principle behind it, but it's been adopted by progressives. And if they really wanted to move forward, they would allow us to be heard. Our agenda is extremely popular, and that's shown in polls as well. It's also shown by a recent Gallup poll, in fact, that showed that it's off the charts right now. People are not enamored of the political establishment or the economic and political elite. People are extremely off-put. Why is it that half of Americans won't accept a COVID shot? Because trust has been destroyed. It's not that they lost trust, it's that our institutions destroyed trust. And that really goes across the board. And, that pertains also to our political parties, which have also destroyed trust. So it's 62% now, according to Gallup poll, that want another independent political party. And they want open debates, like to the tune of 75%. Last time I saw a poll on this, which was during our race, more than 75% of people were clamoring for an open debate. Americans really want democracy, even though we are mischaracterized by media, to say that we're dumb, we're stupid, we're at war with each other, we're at each other's throats. No, the media wants us to be at each other's throats as Democrats and Republicans, so that we won't get outside the box and recognize that the real problem here is the economic and political elite. It's not whether you're a D or an R. Both of those parties are flawed. We need to break that stranglehold and actually have real debates and offer people real choices. There are simple, easy ways to make this happen. And unfortunately, our political establishment, Democrat and Republican, are working overtime to prevent those solutions from coming forward.
Yeah, totally. The bipartisan nature of what you're saying also extends to bipartisan militarism in US foreign policy. So of course, that's very concerning to us. Speaking of how the media wants us to be at our throats, I think Matt Taibbi wrote a really interesting book about this called Hate Inc. I didn't recommend it to people to check it out, about why they do that and how they do it. So thanks, Jill. Those are really great comments. I want to talk a little bit about voting and our culture around voting. And, oh, by the way, first, before we get to that, we at Mass Peace Action supported ranked choice voting. So I'm so glad that you're out there being an advocate for that. So yeah, right. So Jill, I'm a pretty simple person. People could say I'm naive or slow. I prefer the word simple. And if I'm going to vote for someone, I want to vote for the person whose positions like most align with my own. But I hear a lot about, don't vote for the person whose positions most align with your own, because that's going to help the person with the bad positions you don't like. Vote for this other person who also has bad positions you don't like, because somehow that's better for everyone. So why can't I just vote for the person whose positions align with my own? Why can't I just vote for my conscience? Why don't we have a system like that?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, exactly. I think we don't have a system like that because power does not want to be moved, and power doesn't move. And remember, when you're wondering how powerful, is the political establishment, just think about where the money is coming from. And by the way, there was twice as much money pouring into the 2020 election, $14 billion, twice as much, more than twice as much as came in 2016. So money is not going away. Uh, Money is becoming more concentrated and more influential in the political process. So it does not want you to be a part of this process. It really, its purpose is to perpetuate its power, essentially, which is why, to my mind, it's really important, not to fight this in the dark. It's really important to fight this as part of broad coalitions, as social movements. And in my experience, and I've had decades of experience now, social movements by themselves, they're incredibly important, but by themselves, we can't do it. We also have to challenge power because, they'll just bring in the police and they'll take you away and they'll lock you up in jail and, and bias the courts, and it'll take a long time for you to get back out into the streets. We also have to challenge power, and we have to fundamentally work in large coalitions. And if you have a large coalition that coheres over time, by definition, that's kind of a political party. I'm not a fan of political parties, but I've come to recognize that they're necessary in order to, be a part of this process.
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's start taking some questions from the audience. So if people have any questions for Jill, they can put it in the chat and I will read it off to her. So in the meantime, while people gather their questions together. Okay, we have a question from Michael. So let's take a question from Michael here. Mike, can you, yes, you're on mute.
Yeah, it took me a minute to unmute. Jill, at one time, I think a few years ago when you were running for president, there was a green shadow cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
Does that still exist? Or whatever happened to that? And can one be formed again so that we can have more people talking to each other about these issues?
That's a great idea. We had to let that go because it was really hard to continue raising the money for it. Not that it required a huge amount of money, but it did require a staffer, and it was hard to do that and also run for campaigns. But I feel like we're in a very different boat right now, and I think we do need that more than ever. And I appreciate, hearing your thoughts about that. And others have suggested that as well recently, and I think it would be really invaluable. So yeah, let's look for opportunities to make that happen. And I think that's a really terrific suggestion. Thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Jill. So yeah, we have a few questions lined up and we have a little time left. So let's try to keep our questions brief so we can get to as many questions in our remaining minutes. So next up, let's take a question from Mike. Mike, there you go, Mike.
Jill, thank you so much. Good question from the previous speaker. And one of the things that connects it is you've been under attack. And instead of doing things like the Green Shadow Cabinet and God knows what other good stuff you would have been doing, you've been swamped by these attacks. And those of you who are defending you our time is defending you and defending the movement and stuff. So I just thought it would be interesting if for the audience, if you would put some numbers in terms of how much money have you and your supporters spent defending yourself against the attacks that have taken place, Russiagate and the FEC stuff, and how much time You know, it's like, yeah, green shadow cabinet. It's like I've talked to you before. This is devouring quite a bit of your time and energy.
Yeah, it totally is. And I'm, you know, I'll just say this is a huge issue, and this is the purpose. You know, one of the purposes of McCarthyism is to tie you up in defending yourself. And, you know, to look at Russiagate, we had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in my defense with the Senate Intelligence Committee. It is you know, I was investigated for 3 years. By the Senate Intelligence Committee. And that was, you know, and that started like a year after the campaign. So it's only recently that that wrapped up, and that went hand in hand with all these attacks from the media and all these rumor mills. And, you know, it just keeps you completely tied up. You know, in another way, I take it as a badge of honor. You know, the Gandhi saying, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. You know, to me, this is just kind of like a confirmation that they're really worried about the progressive agenda and people who are just gonna keep at it, you know, people who get that we can't sort of create our own safe private lives. It doesn't exist anymore, you know, whether it's the climate or the economy or the pandemic, you know, it's like the predatory system that we live in is endangers all of us, you know, in the same way that the attack on Julian Assange endangers all of us. And, you know, you have to pick your battles, but to my mind, you know, we have to keep going. We have to keep fighting. And I think that public opinion is basically with us, but public opinion is really hampered by the propaganda and the failure of the media to do its job and actually talk about what's important. So all of which is to say, yeah, thank you for your question, Mike. I appreciate it. This is what it means to challenge power, and to think that you can do it and not, you know, and not struggle in that process, you know, is just like naive. And I didn't go into this thinking that it was going to be a cakewalk. You know, this is absolutely what I expected all along. It was just a question of when, you know, would we kind of make enough noise that the system would actually start trying to fight back, and it has. So on we go.
Great. Thanks, Mike, for that question. And thank you, Jill. So we have 3 questions lined up, and then I think we'll start wrapping up the program. So we'll take a question from Jeff, and then Brian, and then Abby. So next up is Jeff. Jeff, can you unmute, please?
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Nice to be with you, Jill. Has anyone addressed or is anyone considering the fragmentation of the progressive movement, that there's too many issues, there's too many separate organizations pursuing their own ends, that everything is, and there's too little coordination among these people in order to get anything significant done? Why? How is this? Why is this?
Yeah, I mean, in my view, the problem is not so much that we don't have the right organizational format. You know, the problem is that we are facing a very empowered, you know, predator state right now that undermine, you know, if we had a media that just did its job, we would be in a totally different ballgame, you know. This is what you just articulated, I think is really, really important. And this is a really vital question, is how do we collaborate in such a way that we can move the ball forward? Because you're right, there's so much to get overwhelmed and distracted by. In my view, this is one of the roles of a political party when it really gets organized, is that it helps.
Forget that.
It's not easy, but, you know, I think that's going to happen before we magically define, you know, what the one thing is. I have not found the magical solution myself. And there are many different ways to approach this, and there are good theories out there. You know, some people say, let's just all organize around healthcare and maybe that will do it. In my experience, that's always been an illusion. And when you just target narrowly one thing, you limit your base of support, and then they knock you down every time. You know, I think, you know, in my view, we need a broad coalition around a broad agenda for people, planet, and peace. You know, that's what I've been working towards within the Green Party. It's not easy work, you know, when you are vilified, when the party's vilified, when the press won't cover you, when there are all sorts of smears and rumor mongering out there. It's very tough work. But if I look at where we are now compared to where we were 20 years ago, you know, we weren't on the map at all. Now we're on the map enough that they feel like they have to suppress us and silence us and smear us and investigate and do all those things to try to shut us down. So I take that as a kind of, you know, that's a sign of progress. And
Could I ask real quickly, what do you think is the one key issue that could change everything? And I'm relating this to Martin Luther King's observation in his last book, when he said that the reason that poverty has not been conquered for decades is because we've addressed things in bits and pieces. You know, we had housing, we had education, we had food, and none of it dealt with poverty. What dealt with poverty was universal income. Now, with that as an analogy, what do you think is that one key issue?
well, I'm going to take a back seat to experts like you who've maybe looked at this more than me. You know, I'm sort of I'm a coalition person myself. So, you know, my thinking is always like, how do we build the, you know, the coalition here? And, you know, how do we, all politics is local, and how do we have an agenda that allows us to prioritize what will get traction in a given place at a given time or in a given race? So I wish I knew the answer to that question. But to me, you know, to me, the bottom line is more like the process. The process is that we need to work together and in a way that really empowers us, because I think we are in a very empowering moment. And, you know, in the words of Alice Walker, you know, let me invoke the two heroes that to me just, they provide lots of guidance, you know. So one is Frederick Douglass, you know, who said power concedes nothing without a demand. We need to make the demand, you know, we need to be heard. We need to be a resistance movement and not just ask for favors, you know, and be apologists for this predatory system. And then Alice Walker, who said, and I'm paraphrasing her, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. To my mind, that's the solution. It's flicking the switch in our brains that we are powerful. And in fact, we have social power behind us right now. The question is, how do we organize? And that's not a static question. It changes depending on the moment and the context.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, for those questions, and thank you, Jill. So we will give you two more questions and then get ready to wrap up here. Brian is asking, what are Dr. Stein's thoughts on the current situation in Taiwan? I heard on NPR this morning that Japan is now, after decades of official pacifism, being pressured by US to pick sides in the conflict. How might that impact peace work and nuclear disarmament globally?
Yeah, and I'm not aware of, you know, what those recent developments are, but I think it's to be expected as part of this drumbeat towards Cold War, towards weapon sales, towards further elevating the stature of the military, towards making Americans afraid. So we'll create bigger military budgets and all that. This is kind of the game plan that we're in right now. And, when I've heard experts and academics talk about this, they make the point that China's pretty powerful, and we don't really want to go challenging China over Taiwan on China's turf. It's a fool's errand. And it's a crazy proposition and very dangerous. I would just say generally, I think we're really playing with fire here. There are far more productive ways to use diplomacy and negotiation to deal with issues around Taiwan or, the other issues that have come up with China. I think the US regards China as a huge economic threat right now and is looking for opportunities to, to God knows what, to create tension with China. They're acting like they're begging for a fight, and it's pretty scary.
Yeah, we agree totally. Okay, for the last question of the night, we will pass the floor to high school student Abby. Abby, can you unmute, please?
Hi.
Hi.
So as a high school student, I'm really interested in getting involved in kind of the progressive movement and politics in general. I wondered if you could talk a bit about how you personally got into politics and any advice you have for young people trying to get involved.
Great. So I got involved very late. I was an activist in social movements, and actually, I think the first thing I was active on was the Vietnam War in high school when I joined protests, and this was before it was popular. And I participated in a weekly standout against the war before anybody was, before people were paying attention to it. That was kind of like the first thing that just kind of pulled me in. And, went from there to a whole slew of issues. And then I transitioned from, I got involved in medicine. I became a medical doctor. And then I then became very active in environmental health and in the epidemic of illnesses that are just now considered, part of nature. They're not part of nature, for us to have cancer and asthma and, all sorts of neurologic problems or developmental disabilities, stuff like that. So I was like fighting this in an academic way. And then I finally realized that's not going anywhere. This is a power struggle. It's really not about educating our leaders or our representatives. They get educated with money. They need big donations. That's how you educate them. And that's not going to come from the grassroots or from the public interest. And around then I got recruited by the Green Party to run for governor of Massachusetts. And I thought, well, nothing else is working. Might as well try a political tack. I think, there are many ways to go here. It certainly seems like young people have so much credibility on climate in particular because it's your future that is going up in flames right now. It's actually all of our future, but it's especially yours. And, I think you have huge credibility just developing some experience there. And, there are good groups, but again, I would be very careful about getting sidetracked by the political machine, which is forever trying to hijack groups, especially groups of young people that they assume they can take advantage of because it's your first time through this. So I think it's really important. Youth work, I think, is huge, but at the same time, I think it's also good to be part of multi-generational work because that way you can take advantage of very hard-won experience. And I would encourage you to look at connecting early on with independent
politics, and testing out that route as well, although it's a hard road to go right now because we are in this McCarthyite era that really makes it very hard for those organizations to be well organized and funded right now. So where can I ask, what state are you in? Are you in Massachusetts, or are you out there in the broader country?
I'm currently in Boston right now, but I live in Utah. So
I see.
very,
Yeah.
very
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I don't, I will say, there are Green Party organizations in and around the state that are worth connecting with. I'm not sure what the state of the Green Party is in Utah right now. I think it's worth checking that out as one example of independent politics that has been around and been around the block a fair amount. And, also looking for like clerkships and internships and stuff like that. You can get a lot of really good experience that way too. But I think in particular, just getting your feet wet in the social movements is really helpful. And the work going on right now, and I would go with the grassroots groups, as opposed to the well-funded ones. But like the indigenous work right now, the pipeline fights are, have incredible integrity. They are fighting the system. They're not getting support from the Democratic Party. They're fighting the system. And I think where you're fighting the system is where you're going to really get a very good grounding, and you're going to be working with people who are not being, they're not inclined to apologize for the system because they're getting it, full force, what the power of that system is to deceive and try to keep us, anchored where we are.
Hello.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby, for those questions. That was really great. And thank you, Jill, for the response. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so we're going to get ready to wrap up the program now. This has been so great. I actually have so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and your time, Jill. We so appreciate everyone coming out tonight and spending your time with us and your interest and listening to Jill's really great answers about all the topics we spoke about. Let me just plug in a couple events. Tomorrow, there's a rally going on in support of Haiti, I think in Boston. So Brian's going to share the information for that in the chat. Yep, there it is in the chat. Rally outside the Haitian consulate in Boston, opposing foreign interventions. So if anyone's interested in that, they can click on the link, they can email me, and we can plug them in with the rally. Tomorrow or in the next day or two, I will send an email to everyone who registered for this event with the video recording of this conversation. So please share that far and wide. We talked a lot about Russiagate and really important things. Tomorrow night, we have a webinar with Jody Evans from Code Pink about China is not our enemy. So if anyone's interested in US-China relations, please join that. Yes, Brian has shared that in the chat as well. And Friday, Brian Garvey, our assistant director, is moderating a discussion with Scott Horton about the intersection of peace activism with progressives and libertarians. So those are some really big events. Jill, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in responding to Abby that, it's like the pipeline work is kind of a guarantee that it's going to have integrity. But I'd say also the anti-war work is also a guarantee that it will have integrity, because the powers that be are not, what shall we say, they are not looking favorably. They are not allied with the anti-war movement whatsoever. And, groups like Mass Peace Action that are daring to actually stand up in the face of this climate of warmongering and McCarthyism groups like that, just, that is a mark of integrity, and it's a great place to, start getting some experience in how to organize and fight these battles.
Great, thank you, Jill, for that. That was really great. Yeah, Abby, Jill is totally right. And if you wanted to at Mass Peace Action, we would welcome your volunteerism or participation. If you want to organize with us, just reach out. That'd be so great. For our young members, we have an internship program for high school and college students. We have a lot of great high school and college students right now. And for everyone, we have working groups where we do all types of anti-war activism and organizing. So that is really great. So yes, again, really quickly, just tomorrow, we're doing a webinar with Jody Evans about No Cold War with China. Tomorrow, there's a rally outside the Haitian consulate in Boston for Haiti against foreign intervention. Friday is a webinar on libertarian and progressive peace activism. And lastly, on August 6th, we're showing a film in Arlington called The War Game. It's about nuclear weapons, and August 6th is the anniversary of the day that the US dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. So it's really important that we all think about that and remember that. And we're doing a film screening in Arlington. So come join us if you are so inclined. Again, thank you to the Community Church of Boston for co-sponsoring this discussion. I so enjoyed listening to Jill today, and I'm looking forward to rewatching the video. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. Jill, do you have any final or closing words you want to leave us with? And also, where can people find your work? Where can people go to support you?
Thank you for asking. And so the main thing I want to say right now, is that this was really a wonderful discussion, and it's so great to be able to have this, because this kind of really frank discussion that looks at these critical issues and that, that sort of won't buy into the silencing and the discrediting of political dissidents. That is part of the war machine, is to discredit peace advocates, and especially peace advocates who are political. This is really important. And I think it's just such a tribute to Mass Peace Action that you are leading the charge here, because it's been very hard to have a platform really anywhere. Since 2016, there's been this total shutdown on real political debate, especially including peace advocacy. So, I'd say this is really wonderful, and I hope this conversation continues. I am at, I'm on Twitter, is basically the best place to find me, and that is at Dr. Jill Stein, and that's Dr. no period, Dr. Jill Stein. That's probably the best place to find me right now. And yeah, I really look forward. It feels like we are in a very dynamic time right now, dynamic, unstable, kind of unpredictable in a very scary way. And I think it's really important for those of us who are not talked into being brain dead here, for us to be talking to each other. And I was so delighted, Amar, when we made contact at the event at Community Church, which is another really wonderful place. I was just so delighted at your suggestion that we get together and talk about some of these forbidden topics. And, it's like, if we're going to change the direction that we're going, these are exactly the kind of conversations that we need to have and act on. And I really encourage people, to get involved in the work that Mass Peace Action is doing right now, which is, really great stuff. And it's really kind of where the conflict zones are right now. So it's really important for people to lean into this kind of anti-war work. So I hope I hope our paths continue to cross, and a big thank you to you, Amar and Brian, and all the others on Peace Action. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. It's really been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Great. No, thank you, Jill. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for leading the charge on issues of peace and justice for so long. I consider you one of our most important leaders, and I'm so glad you were at the Julian Assange event and here tonight. Thank you again to Dean Stevens and Community Church of Boston, and thank you to everyone here tonight. So on that note, everyone, please have a great night.
Peace out.